The intent of this standard is to ensure timely, purpose-driven and effective communication and documentation that support continuous, coordinated and safe care for consumers. There are 5 criteria that underpin this standard. Systems are in place for effective and coordinated communication that supports the delivery of continuous and safe care for consumers. Systems to maintain the identity of the patient are used to ensure that the consumer receives the care intended for them. Processes for structured clinical handover are used to effectively communicate about the health care of the consumer. Systems to effectively communicate critical information and risks when they emerge or change are used to ensure safe consumer care. Essential information is documented in the healthcare record to ensure consumer safety. This standard does not simply focus on shift-to-shift handover. It is interpreted more broadly, and looks at communication throughout the delivery of care. There are 11 actions or activities our service should have in place to meet this standard, and assessors will talk to you about our communication processes. Let's look at some questions that the assessors may ask to determine if we are meeting this standard.
Can you explain to me how your service identifies and manages risk associated with clinical communication?
We have policy documents that identify when clinical communication is necessary, and the associated staff roles and responsibilities. Staff can follow the icon on their desktop to link to the clinical policy.
How does your service monitor and improve the quality of clinical communication?
We use a range of structured communication tools in clinical practice. These are audited and modified based on consumer feedback or recommendations from service committees. Our peer and carer advisory group reviews and provides comment on policies regarding clinical communication. This committee also provides input into the types of information we give to consumers.
What systems does your service have in place to support effective communication?
Our service uses a range of standard forms that support activities like referrals, risk assessment, timeout procedures, admission checklists and discharge summaries. Some of these are paper-based while others are part of the electronic medical record. These forms are updated in line with identified risks, consumer feedback or committee recommendations.
There are a range of team meetings, morning meetings and team huddles that take place in the service. These aim to ensure communication for safety.
The district has a weekly newsletter called The Rounds. This provides updates on clinical innovations within the service.
What processes are in place to ensure that there is consistent and correct identification during the consumer's journey, at admission, during treatment or on transfer?
It is our policy that 3 consumer identifiers are used. These include name, date of birth and address. In inpatient units we use photo ID. There are regular audits of the use of these identifiers and the results are reported at our clinical governance meeting.
How does your service ensure that staff are using these matching processes?
Our training includes processes for matching consumers to their intended care, be that medication administration or ECT. This training reinforces the use of the 3 identifiers.
Does your service have a structured way of communicating at clinical handover?
We use ISPA as the framework for clinical handover. ISPA training is included in our staff training calendar and is part of orientation. I can show you evidence of attendance and evaluation of these training sessions.
How does your service ensure that the consumer's goals and preferences are part of clinical communication?
We have policies and procedures that describe when and where structured communication tools should be used, such as discharge summaries. We audit all of our clinical documentation including discharge summaries. Results of these audits are reported at clinical governance and shared with staff during team meetings. Some parts of our service ensure that the consumer and carer participate in the clinical review process. Our care planning documentation includes the consumer goals, and these are signed by the consumer. We continue to work towards bedside handover in our inpatient units.
How does your service support clinicians in sharing critical information?
Our electronic medical record includes a variety of alerts that draw critical information to the clinician's attention. For some consumers, we have crisis management plans which are shared between service providers to ensure a consistent response to consumer needs. Critical information is also shared as part of the regular multidisciplinary team meetings, and we can show you evidence in the medical record of these meetings taking place and the consumer's preferences being considered.
Our service also uses the YES survey and the Carers Experience survey to identify gaps in communication.
How does your service ensure that a complete, accurate and up-to-date set of information is recorded in the healthcare record and available to clinicians?
We have an integrated electronic medical record. Where paper forms are used in inpatient units, a hybrid paper file is created. In the community, the documents are scanned into the electronic medical record. We audit the electronic medical record regularly to ensure, for example, that care plans are up to date. We undertake regular training on the electronic medication record and our other information systems.
The assessors will want to observe clinical handovers. These include team, multidisciplinary, and clinical review meetings. The assessors will also want to observe timeout processes as part of ECT. The assessors will ask you questions about clinical communication, how you gain access to the policies and procedures that guide your use of clinical information, how your service shares information to provide good quality care, and how your service works to improve your systems of clinical communication. What other evidence could your service provide to meet this standard?